Thank you for joining us. The United States and China are refusing to back down as the world's largest economies ramp up tensions on trade. Now, China announced Friday it would raise its retaliatory tariffs on American goods to 125%. The move comes after the Trump administration raised import taxes on some Chinese goods to 145%. Now, despite the back and forth, the White House says President Trump is optimistic he can work out a deal with Beijing, and that may have boosted the markets today. All three major indexes closed in the green. The Dow was up more than 600 points. The Nasdaq and the S&P 500 both rose about 2%. At the White House press secretary briefing Friday, Carolyn Leavitt defended the president's economic strategy.
The president is, as I just said, trying to renegotiate the global trade agenda that has ripped off the American people for far too long. As he said, this is going to be a period of transition. He wants consumers to trust in him, and they should trust in him.
CBS News contributor J.D. Durkin joins us now. And by the way, we were both at the New York Stock Exchange all day.
Were we ever?
Somehow we made it back here in time. I got to ask you, we had one of the most historic weeks in history on Wall Street. Wednesday, we had huge gains, then followed by Thursday, a flirtation with losses that could have seen a halt in trading. You've got the big banks coming out today saying that we have uncertainty, and you heard that word over and over. So please explain to me, why did we finish in the green?
Well, first of all, the stock market clearly needs a therapist to deal with all the wild mood swings that we've seen across Wall Street the last week and a half. We were saying this with Major Garrett in the 5 o'clock hour earlier today. The market really entered oversold territory. I mean, there was just so much downward pressure due to this overall tariff uncertainty that at some point, I think buyers were looking for any little sense of relief, which we did see Wednesday. And we can't forget, we actually caught that earlier in the week off of basically a bad news, a fake news report that spread viral on social media. The White House had to correct. That was writing on the wall for how desperate investors were for any little sense of relief. We got some clarification on Wednesday, and then we gave back about a third of those gains in yesterday's session. Right. I think in terms of today's market, we did finish up into the green, which is nice to see. But Kelly, you know as well as I do, every analyst, everyone on Wall Street we talk to says uncertainty is the name of the game. We heard that from Jamie Dimon in that earnings call from J.P. Morgan Chase earlier today.
Yeah, we heard him say turbulent. Right.
And we're going to hear a lot of variations on that term, I think, throughout all of earnings season, because it is so difficult to project what the next step is going to be in tariffs, and investors really like certainty, and that's in short supply right now.
Well, so let's talk about the next step, because, I mean, China's clearly not backing down right now anytime soon. What do investors make of all of that back and forth, and what it could mean for the global economy?
I think everyone is in a wait-and-see mode. Now, it was really good to get some answers, at least on Wednesday, but we can't forget, that's only a 90-day pause for the rest of those countries. That means President Trump has about 90 days now, maybe 89 or so, to make over 150 trade deals, even if he can do that, which I think many on Wall Street are skeptical he can. But if he can, that says nothing for China. That is the #1 tariff policy foe in all of this. He is trying to bring Beijing to heel, and that is certainly no easy task. We saw evidence of China devaluing its own currency earlier this week. That means they are digging in their heels for a long-standing fight here, and it doesn't really appear as if we're going to be able to break through that anytime soon.
Well, and we bought over $400 billion worth of goods from them last year. They're one of our biggest trading partners. So either businesses are going to find another way, another country to get goods from, or they're going to have to deal with those prices. I do want to switch gears here because we got some good economic data today, 2 days of good economic data, the Producer Price Index, which measures how much producers pay when they're producing those goods. What do we think about that data from your perspective, and what it could mean in the future with tariffs?
It's amazing. If we were not dealing with all this sweeping tariff uncertainty, that's really good news for the markets, because remember what the biggest catalyst for all this has been in the last few years? It's been Jerome Powell, the central bank, bringing down inflation closer to 2%. We got some anecdotal evidence. Yesterday's CPI print, today's PPI print, we're heading in the right direction. Arguably, PCE, personal consumption expenditures, as you know, Kelly, that's really the big one for the Fed. We get that the last day of April. But, you know, it's on the backdrop of all of this tariff uncertainty moving forward. And Jerome Powell has said it's very difficult for even us as the central bank to give the American people a sense of what the future path of interest rates looks like, given we still don't know what the tariff implications are going to be. So I would say in the short term, yes, we got good news. We want to see that anecdotal good news continue to build. Maybe that starts to shift the narrative on Wall Street. But we certainly know we're having this conversation on Friday night. Anything can happen this weekend and set the stage for an unpredictable week on Wall Street, to say the least, coming up.
Well, definitely. And yeah, I mean, the consumer price index yesterday, you would have thought you would have seen a huge rally. There's so many different things at play. And thank you so much, J.D. Durkin, for coming on and explaining it to us.
Thank you.
CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman is in West Palm Beach, Florida, where the president will spend the weekend. Willie, thanks for joining us. How is the White House responding to China's latest escalation on tariffs?
Hey there, Kelly. Good to be with you on this Friday. Well, the White House is saying that the president is optimistic that the Chinese want to make a deal here. Let's remember how we got here. Essentially, it's because the United States, in this case, the Trump administration and President Trump, decided to put those tariffs on China that you mentioned. Now, they're at 145%. That includes the fentanyl tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs. Of course, the Chinese hit back a couple of times. Now their tariffs are set at 125%. And the Chinese are essentially saying that the tariff policy coming from the United States is a joke. But the administration, the press secretary, said earlier today that the president is essentially wanting to make a deal here, optimistic about those chances. But she didn't exactly say whether or not there are plans for a conversation or whether or not the president is waiting for President Xi to pick up the phone. So there perhaps is some wiggle room there for what could potentially happen, but still nonetheless, the White House pushing forward with this tariff plan and essentially saying that the president is looking to make a deal not only with China, but the hundreds of other countries that could potentially face the wrath of the tariff policy that the United States has put forward.
Well, so let me pick up on that, because the White House has said more than 75 countries have reached out to cut some kind of trade deal. We've heard that 15 may be on the table. How much progress has been made in these negotiations?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The White House hasn't really given many specifics, though, but we do, of course, know that the president has been working the phone, speaking with the leaders in countries like Vietnam, for instance, who the president mentioned that they want to remove their tariff barriers there. That's a really important country. You know this as well, is because they ship things like furniture, apparel, and Nike being one of the larger U.S. companies that has operations there in that country that could potentially face those tariffs, those reciprocal tariffs that have been levied by the United States. Of course, those are on pause for the 90 days for the White House to work out a deal here. We, of course, know that the president met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier this week, that he's spoken with leaders from Japan as well. And we do know that there's a planned meeting with the leader of Italy to come to Washington to visit with the president. That's certainly in the works, but still, there are a lot of phone conversations that the president and his advisors will have to have, as you and J.D. discussed, to work out some type of deal here. But the White House isn't giving much detail in terms of what's on the table, but simply saying that at least 15 nations have put forward some type of offer for this tariff plan.
Yeah, definitely investors, businesses, consumers, all watching those deals very closely. Willie James Inman, thank you. As we mentioned, President Trump is spending the weekend at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach, Florida. On Friday, the president underwent his annual physical at Walter Reed Medical Center. Earlier this week, Trump wrote on Truth Social that he's, quote, never felt better. The escalating trade war between China and the U.S. could have global ramifications. Nick Marsh from our partners at BBC News is in Singapore with more.
Yesterday, the message from Beijing to Washington was, if you want to talk and have dialogue as equals, then we can talk and have dialogue. But if you want to have a fight, we can also have a fight. And the way it's transpired today is certainly the latter. Make no mistake, we are now in the midst of a fully blown trade war between the world's two big economic superpowers. But China is feeling quite bullish. The reckoning in Beijing is that American consumers simply rely too much on cheap Chinese goods, whereas Chinese manufacturers, well, they can sell to their huge 1.5 billion person domestic market, and they can sell to the rest of the world, including here Southeast Asia, this rising market of hundreds of millions of people. And guess where Xi Jinping, China's leader, is going to be next week? Southeast Asia. He's going to Vietnam, Cambodia and Malaysia, and his message is going to be, whose side do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the so-called bullying, unreliable, tariff-imposing side of the United States, or do you want to be with us, your friendly, free trading neighbor, China? But people here will be wary, because if the goods can't go to America and they go here, there's going to be a deluge of cheap Chinese goods, which is good for consumers, but it's not good for local manufacturers and local workers in this region. So this is definitely a trade war between the United States and China, but the ramifications, as you say, are global.
Nick Marsh, thank you.